There are moments in life when you walk away from a conversation and feel completely emptied. You might not be able to name what happened. You didn't argue. You didn't share anything particularly personal. The interaction seemed normal, even pleasant on the surface. And yet, as you close the door or hang up the phone, there's a heaviness that settles over you. A kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with physical exertion. Your mind feels foggy. Your body feels weighted. You find yourself needing silence, needing space, needing to recover from something you can't quite identify. This feeling is real, and it's more common than you might think. The truth is, not all interactions affect us the same way. Some people leave us feeling lighter, clearer, maybe even energized. Others leave us feeling like we've just run a marathon we didn't sign up for. And while it's easy to dismiss this as coincidence or personality clash, the reality is far more structured. There are patterns. There are reasons. There are specific dynamics at play that determine whether an interaction nourishes you or depletes you. This audiobook is about understanding those dynamics. It's about recognizing that feeling drained is not random. It's not a reflection of weakness. It's a signal. A signal that something in the exchange, whether it's the other person's communication style, your own internal reactions, or the absence of boundaries, is costing you more than you realize. And when you begin to see these patterns clearly, something profound happens. You stop feeling confused by your own exhaustion. You stop blaming yourself for not being stronger or more patient. You start to see that protecting your energy is not about avoiding people. It's about understanding what happens between you and others, and learning to navigate those moments with awareness and intention. Because the goal is not isolation, the goal is balance. The goal is to move through the world without losing yourself in the process. To understand why certain interactions drain you, you first need to understand what emotional energy actually is. We talk about feeling drained all the time, but we rarely stop to define what that means. What exactly is being drained, and why does it happen in some interactions and not others? Emotional energy is not the same as physical energy, though the two are closely connected. Physical energy is what you use to move, to work, to stay active. Emotional energy is what you use to engage with the world on a psychological level. It's what allows you to listen, to empathize, to process information, to manage your reactions, to hold space for others. Every time you enter a conversation, you're using emotional energy. Every time you respond to someone's emotions, you're drawing from that same reserve. And just like physical energy, emotional energy is finite. You don't have an endless supply. It replenishes with rest, with solitude, with activities that feel nourishing. And it depletes with overuse, with stress, with interactions that demand more than you have to give. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all interactions drain energy at the same rate. Some conversations feel easy. They flow. You give, the other person gives, and the exchange feels balanced. You might even walk away feeling better than when you started. Other conversations feel effortful. You're doing most of the emotional labor. You're listening, adjusting, managing, translating, soothing. And by the end, you feel like you've been working, even if you were just sitting still. The difference comes down to what the interaction requires of you. And this is where the concept of cognitive and emotional load becomes essential. Cognitive load refers to the amount of mental effort required to process information. When someone speaks clearly, when they organize their thoughts, when they give you space to respond, the cognitive load is manageable. But when someone rambles, contradicts themselves, speaks in circles, or requires you to constantly interpret what they mean, the cognitive load increases. Your brain has to work harder to keep up. Emotional load is similar, but it applies to feelings. When someone expresses emotions in a way that feels contained and appropriate, you can respond without taking on the full weight of their experience. But when someone floods you with emotions, when they expect you to carry their distress, when they make you responsible for how they feel, the emotional load becomes heavy. And here's the crucial part. You can handle high cognitive or emotional load in small doses. But if an interaction consistently demands more than it gives back, if you're always the one processing, translating, soothing, and receiving little in return, that's when exhaustion sets in. Because emotional energy isn't just about what you give, it's also about what you receive. In balanced interactions, there's a kind of reciprocity. You listen, and you're also heard. You offer support, and support is offered back. You bring attention and presence, and the other person does the same. But in draining interactions, that reciprocity is absent. You're giving, but you're not receiving. You're holding space, but no space is being held for you. And over time, that imbalance becomes unsustainable. Your emotional reserves deplete, and you're left feeling empty, not because you're weak, but because the exchange was fundamentally unequal. This is why some people leave you feeling drained while others don't. It's not about whether you like them. It's not even necessarily about whether they're difficult. It's about the structure of the interaction itself. It's about what's being asked of you and whether the relationship allows for balance. Understanding this changes everything, because it means that feeling drained is not a personal failure. It's information. It's feedback about the nature of the interaction. And when you start paying attention to that feedback, you can begin to see the specific patterns that cost you the most. So what are those patterns? What kinds of interactions tend to drain emotional energy the fastest? While every person and every relationship is different, there are certain dynamics that consistently leave people feeling exhausted, and recognizing these patterns is the first step toward managing them. One of the most common draining patterns is constant negativity. This doesn't mean someone is going through a hard time and needs support. That's different. What we're talking about here is a chronic, relentless focus on what's wrong. Every conversation becomes a list of complaints. Every topic turns into a critique. There's no curiosity, no openness, no recognition of anything positive. Just an endless stream of dissatisfaction. When you're in the presence of constant negativity, your nervous system reacts. Even if you're not saying much, even if you're just listening, your body registers the emotional tone. And because negativity often comes with an implicit demand, fix this, validate this, agree with me, you end up doing emotional labor just by being present. You're not just hearing words. You're managing the weight of someone else's worldview. And that takes energy. Another draining pattern is the one-sided conversation. You know this dynamic well if you've ever spent an hour with someone and realized, afterward, that they never asked you a single question. They talked about their day, their thoughts, their problems, their plans, and you listened, you nodded, you responded. But there was no space for you, no curiosity about your experience, no invitation to share. One-sided conversations are exhausting because they require you to be entirely other-focused. You're holding attention, tracking their narrative, offering responses that keep the conversation going, but you're receiving nothing in return. There's no mutual exchange, just output on their end and absorption on yours. Then there's emotional dependency. This is when someone consistently looks to you to regulate their emotions. They're upset, and they need you to calm them down. They're anxious, and they need you to reassure them. They're confused, and they need you to make sense of things for them. Emotional dependency turns you into a kind of emotional manager, and while offering support is a natural part of relationships, dependency is different. It's when the responsibility for their emotional state becomes yours. When they can't tolerate their own feelings without your intervention. When your presence becomes the only thing that soothes them. This is draining because it places you in a role that's inherently unsustainable. You become responsible not just for your own emotional regulation, but for theirs as well. And that's a load most people cannot carry indefinitely. Conflict-driven communication is another pattern worth noting. Some people interact primarily through disagreement. They challenge everything you say. They argue for the sake of arguing. They interpret neutral statements as provocations. Every conversation becomes a debate. Every observation becomes something to contest. This doesn't mean healthy disagreement is draining. It's not. What's draining is the need to constantly defend yourself, to justify your thoughts, to brace for conflict even in casual exchanges. It keeps your nervous system activated. It keeps you on guard. And that state of vigilance is exhausting. There's also the pattern of unspoken expectations. This is when someone expects you to know what they need without them saying it. They expect you to read between the lines, to intuit their feelings, to anticipate their reactions. And when you don't, they're hurt or frustrated. But they don't tell you what they wanted. They just withdraw or make indirect comments that leave you guessing. Unspoken expectations create a minefield of potential missteps. You're never quite sure if you've done something wrong. You're constantly scanning for clues, trying to figure out what's really being asked of you. And that constant interpretation, that mental effort to decode what isn't being said, is cognitively and emotionally draining. Then there are people who overshare without boundaries. They tell you everything, every detail of their personal life, their relationships, their body, their thoughts. And they do this without checking if you're comfortable, without considering the level of intimacy you've actually established. Oversharing puts you in the position of holding information you didn't ask for and may not know how to respond to. It creates a false sense of intimacy that can feel invasive. And it often comes with an unspoken expectation that you'll reciprocate, even if you're not ready to. All of these patterns have one thing in common. They require more from you than they give back. They demand attention, empathy, energy, and care without offering the same in return. And while any of these dynamics can be manageable in small doses, when they become the norm, when they define the relationship, that's when exhaustion becomes inevitable. Because you're not interacting, you're compensating, and compensation, over time, depletes you. Let me tell you about someone we'll call Maya. Maya was the kind of person people loved to be around. She was warm, thoughtful, an excellent listener. Friends often told her how easy she was to talk to, how much better they felt after spending time with her. And for a long time, Maya took pride in that. She liked being someone people could rely on. She liked feeling helpful. But over the years, something started to shift. Maya began noticing that after certain interactions, she felt completely drained. not just tired, drained. Like something had been pulled out of her that she couldn't name. It started with her friend Jenna. Jenna was going through a breakup, and Maya was there for her. She listened for hours. She offered support, reassurance, perspective. She made herself available whenever Jenna needed to talk. And at first, it felt good to be there for her friend. But weeks turned into months, and the conversations didn't change. Every call was about the same breakup, the same pain, the same circular thoughts. Maya would offer suggestions, and Jenna would dismiss them. Maya would try to shift the conversation, and Jenna would steer it back. And every time they hung up, Maya felt heavier. She started to dread seeing Jenna's name on her phone. And then she felt guilty for dreading it. Because Jenna was her friend. And friends are supposed to be there for each other. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wasn't just supporting Jenna. She was holding her. And Jenna wasn't holding herself at all. There was also Maya's co-worker, David. David was charming and talkative. He'd stop by her desk almost every day to chat. At first, Maya enjoyed the conversations, but over time, she realized something. David never asked her anything. He talked about his weekend, his projects, his opinions on everything from office politics to sports, and Maya listened. She responded. She engaged. But he never once asked about her life, not her weekend, not her projects, not her thoughts. It was a completely one-sided exchange, and yet Maya kept participating, because saying no felt rude, because cutting him off felt mean, because she didn't know how to create space for herself without feeling like she was rejecting him. Then there was her mother. Conversations with her mother had always been complicated, but lately they left Maya feeling especially exhausted. Her mother had a way of turning every conversation into something Maya had to manage. If Maya shared good news, her mother found a way to worry about it. If Maya expressed a struggle, her mother either minimized it or made it about herself. And there were constant unspoken expectations. Her mother would hint that she wanted Maya to call more, visit more, do more. But she never said it directly. She just made comments that left Maya feeling guilty and confused. Maya started to notice a pattern. After talking to her mother, she felt anxious. After talking to David, she felt invisible. After talking to Jenna, she felt like a container for someone else's pain. And she didn't know what to do about it. Because these were people she cared about, people she didn't want to cut out of her life. But she also couldn't keep going the way she was. She was exhausted. She was resentful. And she felt guilty for feeling that way. Maya's breaking point came one evening after back-to-back calls. First Jenna, then her mother. By the time she hung up, she felt like she couldn't breathe. She sat on her couch in silence, staring at nothing, feeling completely emptied. And for the first time, she asked herself a question she'd been avoiding. Why do I feel this way? Not why are they like this, but why do I feel this way? Why do I let these conversations go on when I can feel myself disappearing inside them? Why do I say yes when I want to say no? Why do I take responsibility for other people's emotions? Why do I give so much of myself and feel angry when it's not returned? Even though I never asked for anything in return, these were hard questions. And Maya didn't have answers right away. But asking them was the beginning of something important, because she realized that the exhaustion she felt wasn't just about other people. It was also about her, about what she was allowing, about what she was doing in these interactions that made them so depleting. And that realization, uncomfortable as it was, gave her something she hadn't had before, a sense of control. Because if her own behavior was part of the problem, then her own behavior could also be part of the solution. The concept of boundaries is one of the most talked about and least understood ideas in psychology. People know they're supposed to have boundaries. They know boundaries are important, but many people don't actually know what a boundary is or how to create one without feeling guilty. A boundary is not a wall. It's not about shutting people out or refusing to care. A boundary is simply a limit. It's a clear line that defines where you end and someone else begins. It's the difference between supporting someone and carrying them, between being present and being consumed, between caring and losing yourself. Boundaries protect your emotional energy. They allow you to engage with people without being depleted by them. But here's the thing. Boundaries require you to know what you need. And they require you to communicate those needs, even when it's uncomfortable. For many people, especially those who are naturally empathetic or who were raised to prioritize others, boundaries feel selfish. They feel like rejection. They feel like saying, "I don't care about you." But that's not what boundaries are. Boundaries are what allow you to care sustainably. Because without them, you give until you have nothing left. And then you resent the very people you were trying to help. Let's look at what happens when boundaries are absent. When you don't have boundaries, other people's emotions become your responsibility. If they're upset, you feel like you need to fix it. If they're disappointed, you feel like you've failed. If they're angry, you feel like you need to absorb it. You become hyper, attuned to their emotional state, and you adjust yourself constantly to manage it. This is exhausting, because you're not just managing your own inner world, you're managing theirs too, and most of the time, you're doing this without them even asking. You're anticipating, you're compensating, you're trying to keep the peace, keep them happy, keep things smooth. But peace that requires you to constantly self-abandon is not actually peace, it's self-erasure. Without boundaries, conversations that should be brief become endless. Because you don't know how to end them. You don't know how to say, "I need to go," or "I can't talk about this right now." So you stay, you listen, you absorb, and you walk away drained. Without boundaries, you say yes when you mean no. You agree to things you don't want to do. You take on responsibilities that aren't yours. And you do all of this because you're afraid of disappointing people, afraid of conflict, afraid of being seen as selfish or unkind. But here's the truth. Saying yes when you mean no is not kindness. It's self-betrayal. And over time, that self-betrayal breeds resentment. You start to resent the people you're helping, not because they're bad people, but because you're giving more than you actually want to give, and you're blaming them for something you never told them you didn't want to do. Boundaries prevent this. Boundaries allow you to be honest, to say, "I care about you, and I can't take this on right now." To say, "I want to support you, and I also need to protect my own energy." To say, "I'm stepping back, not because I don't care, but because I need to take care of myself." These statements might feel uncomfortable at first. They might feel harsh. But they're not. They're clear. And clarity is one of the kindest things you can offer, both to yourself and to others. Because when you're clear about your limits, people know where they stand. There's no guessing, no unspoken resentment, no slow build-up of exhaustion that eventually leads to withdrawal. Boundaries also protect you from taking on emotions that aren't yours. When someone is upset, You can be present without absorbing their distress. You can listen without making their feelings your responsibility. You can offer support without trying to fix everything. This doesn't mean you're cold. It means you're differentiated. You understand that you can care about someone's pain without carrying it, that their emotional experience belongs to them, and that your role is not to take it away, but to witness it. Creating boundaries is not easy, especially if you've spent years without them. It requires practice. It requires self-awareness. It requires the willingness to tolerate discomfort, both your own and other people's. But it's also one of the most important skills you can develop. Because boundaries don't just protect your energy. They protect your relationships. They allow you to show up as yourself, rather than as a version of yourself that's been drained, resentful, and exhausted. And that version of you, the one that's protected and resourced, is the version that can actually connect. One of the most common reasons people feel drained in relationships is not because they're giving, but because they're over-giving. And while these might sound like the same thing, they're not. Giving comes from a place of choice. Over-giving comes from a place of fear. Giving is when you offer support, because you want to, because it feels aligned, because you have the capacity. Over-giving is when you offer support because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't, afraid the person will be upset, afraid they'll think you don't care, afraid you'll be seen as selfish. Over-giving is rooted in people-pleasing, and people-pleasing at its core is not about generosity, it's about control. It's the belief that if you just give enough, do enough, be enough, you can control how others feel about you. You can avoid conflict. You can avoid rejection. You can keep everything smooth. But here's what actually happens. The more you over-give, the more you lose yourself. You stop checking in with what you actually want or need. You stop honoring your own limits. You become so focused on managing other people's emotions that you forget to manage your own. And the exhaustion that follows is not just physical. It's existential. Because when you're constantly shifting to meet other people's needs, you lose touch with who you are. People pleasers often describe feeling invisible, and that's because, in a way, they are. They've made themselves invisible. They've learned to hide their needs, their preferences, their boundaries, in order to keep others comfortable. And while this might create temporary harmony, it doesn't create connection. Because connection requires presence, and you can't be present when you're performing. Over-giving also creates a dynamic where you give without being asked, and then feel resentful when your effort isn't recognized or returned. You anticipate what someone might need. You go out of your way to provide it. And then, when they don't respond the way you hoped, you feel hurt. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you give without being asked, you can't expect the other person to know what you were hoping to receive in return. You've created an unspoken contract, and unspoken contracts always lead to disappointment. Because the other person doesn't even know they've entered into one. This doesn't mean you shouldn't be generous. It means your generosity should come from a genuine desire to give, not from a need to be needed, not from a fear of what will happen if you stop. One of the most telling signs of over-giving is how you feel afterward. When you give from a healthy place, you feel good, you feel aligned. You might be tired, but it's a satisfied kind of tired. But when you over-give, you feel depleted. You feel resentful. You feel taken advantage of, even if the other person didn't ask for what you gave. That resentment is a signal. It's telling you that you've crossed your own boundary, that you've given more than you had to give, and that the giving wasn't truly voluntary. Learning to stop over giving requires a fundamental shift. It requires you to believe that your worth is not determined by how much you do for others, that you're allowed to have needs, that it's okay to say no, that people who truly care about you will not abandon you for having limits. This shift doesn't happen overnight, especially if you've spent years believing that your value lies in your usefulness, but it's possible, and it starts with small steps. It starts with pausing before you say yes, asking yourself, do I actually want to do this? Or am I doing it out of fear? It starts with noticing when you feel resentful, and instead of blaming the other person, asking yourself, what boundary did I not set? It starts with practicing saying no, even in small ways, even when it feels uncomfortable. And it starts with trusting that the discomfort of saying no is better than the exhaustion of saying yes when you don't mean it. Because giving doesn't protect your relationships. It erodes them. It builds resentment. It creates distance. And it leaves you feeling drained, invisible, and alone. But when you learn to give from a place of authenticity, from a place of choice, something beautiful happens. You stop feeling exhausted by your own generosity. You start to trust that people care about you for who you are, not just for what you do. And you begin to show up in your relationships not as a martyr, but as a person, a whole, boundaried, resourced person. And that version of you is far more capable of real connection than the over-giving version ever was. While it's important to recognize the external patterns that drain your energy, it's equally important to understand the internal ones. Because the truth is, feeling drained is not always about what someone else is doing. Sometimes it's about how you're responding. Your internal reactions, the stories you tell yourself, the emotions you suppress, the meaning you assign to interactions, all of these play a significant role in how much energy an interaction costs you. Let's start with rumination. Rumination is when you replay a conversation over and over in your mind. You analyze what was said. You think about what you should have said. You wonder what the other person meant. You imagine different outcomes. You try to make sense of something that felt off. Rumination is mentally exhausting because you're not just having the conversation once. You're having it dozens of times, and each time you're using cognitive and emotional energy to process it. Often, rumination happens when something in the interaction triggered a deeper fear or insecurity. Maybe you're worried you said something wrong. Maybe you're afraid the person is upset with you. Maybe you're trying to figure out if you're liked, valued, or accepted. And because these are questions you can't answer on your own, you keep turning them over, looking for clues, trying to find certainty. But rumination doesn't bring certainty. It just drains you. Another internal pattern is responsibility. This is when you take responsibility for things that aren't actually yours to carry. Someone is upset, and you assume it's your fault. Someone is disappointed, and you think you've failed them. Someone is struggling, and you believe you should be able to fix it. Responsibility keeps you in a constant state of vigilance. You're always scanning for problems, always trying to anticipate needs, always managing outcomes, and that's exhausting. Because you're trying to control things that are fundamentally outside your control, like how other people feel, how they react, what they think of you. Then there's emotional suppression. This is when you don't allow yourself to feel what you're actually feeling during an interaction. Someone says something that bothers you, but you smile and let it go. Someone crosses a boundary, but you don't say anything. Someone dismisses you, but you pretend it's fine. Suppressing your emotions doesn't make them disappear. It just means you're using energy to hold them down, and that energy has to come from somewhere. Usually, it comes from your reserve of emotional capacity, which means that by the end of the interaction, you're drained, not just from what happened, but from what you didn't let yourself respond to. There's also the pattern of comparison. This is when you measure yourself against the other person during the interaction. You notice how confident they seem, how articulate, how at ease, and you judge yourself for not being the same. Comparison pulls you out of the present moment. It takes you out of connection and puts you into evaluation. And that evaluative state is cognitively taxing. You're not just interacting. You're monitoring yourself, criticizing yourself, trying to perform, and performance is draining. Another internal pattern worth noting is the need for external validation. This is when your sense of okayness depends on how the other person responds to you. If they seem engaged, you feel good. If they seem distracted, you feel anxious. If they validate you, you feel worthy. If they don't, you feel inadequate. This makes every interaction high stakes, because your emotional state is contingent on something you can't control. And that lack of control creates anxiety, which, over time, becomes exhausting. So what do you do about these internal patterns? The first step is awareness. You have to notice when you're doing these things. Notice when you're ruminating. Notice when you're taking on responsibility that isn't yours. Notice when you're suppressing your feelings or comparing yourself or looking for validation. Just noticing is powerful, because awareness creates a small gap between the stimulus and your response. And in that gap, you have choice. The second step is self-compassion. These patterns didn't develop randomly. They developed as ways to protect yourself, as strategies to stay safe, to be liked, to avoid conflict. So instead of judging yourself for having them, approach them with curiosity. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I don't do this? What do I think I'm protecting myself from? The third step is practice. Practice letting conversations end without replaying them. Practice recognizing that someone else's emotions are not your responsibility. Practice allowing yourself to feel what you feel, even if it's uncomfortable. Practice staying present instead of comparing. Practice finding your okayness inside yourself instead of looking for it in someone else's response. These practices won't eliminate the patterns overnight, but they will reduce their intensity. And over time, you'll find that interactions cost you less, not because people have changed, but because you're no longer using so much energy managing your internal reactions. You're allowing yourself to be present, to feel, to respond authentically, and that presence, that authenticity, is far less draining than the constant effort of self-monitoring and suppression. Because when you're not fighting yourself, you have more energy for everything else. So how do you actually protect your energy in day-to-day interactions? How do you navigate relationships without becoming depleted? The answer is not about building walls or withdrawing from people. It's about developing practices that allow you to stay connected while also staying resourced. One of the most effective strategies is presence with detachment. This might sound contradictory, but it's not. Presence means being fully there during an interaction, listening, engaging, offering attention. Detachment means not taking on the other person's emotional state as your own. It means recognizing that you can witness someone's pain without absorbing it, that you can care without carrying. Presence with detachment allows you to be supportive without being consumed. It allows you to hold space without losing yourself in that space. And it's a skill that takes practice, because many of us were taught that caring means merging, that empathy means feeling what the other person feels. But true empathy is understanding what someone feels, not becoming it. Another key strategy is time bounding. This is especially useful with people or situations you know tend to drain you. Instead of having open-ended conversations, you set a clear time frame. You might say, "I have 20 minutes to talk," or "I can stay until 6. Time bounding gives you a structure. It allows you to be present without the anxiety of not knowing when the interaction will end. And it protects you from conversations that stretch on far longer than your capacity allows. It also gives you permission to exit without guilt, because you've been clear from the beginning about your availability. There's also the practice of selective vulnerability. Not every interaction requires you to share deeply. Not every person has earned access to your inner world. Selective vulnerability means being intentional about what you share and with whom. It means recognizing that some relationships are meant to be light. Some are meant to be deep, and trying to go deep with someone who isn't capable of holding that depth will leave you feeling exposed and drained. Protecting your energy also means learning to redirect conversations. If someone is spiraling into negativity or repetition, you don't have to just sit there and absorb it. You can gently redirect. You might say, "I hear that this is really hard. What do you think might help?" Or, "It sounds like you're stuck on this. Have you thought about talking to someone who can support you with it?" Redirecting is not dismissive. It's boundaried. It acknowledges the person's experience while also signaling that you're not a limitless container. Another important practice is emotional reset between interactions. If you know you're going to have a draining conversation, plan something afterward that helps you return to yourself. It might be a walk. It might be silence. It might be journaling or listening to music. Resetting allows you to process what happened and release what you've absorbed. It prevents the residue of one interaction from contaminating the rest of your day. You also need to give yourself permission to say no. No to plans that feel like too much. No to conversations you don't have capacity for. No to requests that cross your boundaries. Saying no doesn't make you unkind, it makes you honest. And honesty is the foundation of sustainable relationships. There's also the practice of checking in with yourself during interactions. This is a simple but powerful tool. Every so often, pause internally and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Am I still present, or am I starting to feel drained? Do I need to redirect this conversation? Do I need to end it? This internal check-in helps you catch exhaustion before it becomes overwhelming. It gives you the chance to adjust before you're completely depleted. And finally, one of the most underrated strategies is simply spending time with people who energize you. People who are reciprocal, who are curious, who hold space for you the way you hold space for them. These relationships are replenishing, and when you're resourced by positive connections, you have more capacity to navigate the difficult ones. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It's not cold. It's not about refusing to care. It's about recognizing that you are a finite being with finite resources, and that in order to show up well in the world, In order to be present and compassionate and engaged, you need to take care of the resource that makes all of that possible, which is you. Once you begin to understand the dynamics that drain you, a natural question arises. What do I do with this information? Do I distance myself from certain people? Do I end relationships that feel hard? Do I avoid interactions that cost me energy? These are important questions, and the answers are not one size fits all, because the goal is not to eliminate all difficult interactions. The goal is to choose wisely where you invest your energy. Not all relationships are meant to be equally deep. Not all interactions deserve the same level of emotional labor, and learning to differentiate between the two is one of the most important skills you can develop. Let's start with the concept of relational investment. Every relationship requires some level of energy, but not every relationship is worth the same investment. Some relationships are foundational. These are the people who are consistently present, reciprocal, and supportive. They add to your life. They hold space for you. They respect your boundaries. These relationships are worth significant investment because the energy you give is met with energy in return. Then there are situational relationships. These are co-workers, acquaintances, neighbors, people you interact with regularly, but who are not central to your life. These relationships don't require deep emotional investment, and that's okay. You can be kind, professional, engaged, without giving everything you have. Then there are draining relationships. These are the ones that consistently take more than they give. And this is where discernment becomes essential, because not all draining relationships need to end, but they do need boundaries. Some people are going through something difficult, and their neediness is temporary. In these cases, you can offer support while also being clear about your limits. You can show up without over-giving. You can be present without becoming their sole source of stability. But if the draining dynamic is chronic, if it's been going on for years, if there's no reciprocity and no willingness to change, then you have a decision to make. You can continue the relationship with very clear boundaries, or you can step back. Stepping back doesn't always mean ending the relationship. Sometimes it just means reducing contact, limiting the depth of your interactions, stopping the pattern of over-functioning. This can feel painful, especially if you care about the person, especially if you've been the one holding the relationship together. But choosing to protect your energy is not abandonment. It's self-preservation, and sometimes self-preservation is the only way to stop resentment from turning into bitterness. There's also the question of obligation. Many people stay in draining relationships because they feel they have to, because the person is family, because they've known them for years, because it would be mean to pull back. But obligation without genuine care is a recipe for resentment, and relationships built on obligation are not sustainable. You're allowed to choose where you invest your energy. You're allowed to prioritize relationships that feel nourishing. You're allowed to step back from relationships that consistently deplete you. And you're allowed to do all of this without guilt, because protecting your energy is not selfish, it's necessary. One helpful framework is to ask yourself 3 questions about any relationship. Does this person respect my boundaries? Is there reciprocity? Do I feel like myself when I'm with them? If the answer to all 3 is yes, that's a relationship worth investing in. If the answer to all 3 is no, that's a relationship that needs boundaries or distance. And if the answers are mixed, that's a relationship that might need adjustment. Maybe you reduce the frequency of contact. Maybe you redirect certain topics. Maybe you set clearer expectations about what you can and can't offer. The key is intentionality. Too often, we drift through relationships on autopilot. We keep showing up because we always have. We keep giving because we don't know how to stop. But when you become intentional, when you start choosing based on what actually nourishes you, everything shifts. You stop feeling drained by your social life. You stop feeling obligated to people who don't value your energy. You start to build a relational ecosystem that supports you rather than depletes you. And that shift is profound, because it means you're no longer a passive recipient of other people's demands. You're an active participant in your own life. Choosing where to invest your energy is not about being cold or transactional. It's about being honest. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you have to give. Honest about the kind of relationships that allow you to thrive. And that honesty, while uncomfortable at first, is what creates the space for real, sustainable connection. Let's return to Maya. When we left her, she was sitting on her couch, feeling completely drained after back-to-back calls. She had just begun to ask herself the hard questions. Why do I feel this way? Why do I allow these conversations to go on? Why do I give so much of myself? In the weeks that followed, Maya started paying closer attention. She noticed that before every call with Jenna, she felt a sense of dread. Not because she didn't care about Jenna, but because she knew the conversation would be exactly the same. And she knew she'd spend an hour trying to help, only to feel like nothing she said made a difference. One day when Jenna called, Maya did something she'd never done before. After 20 minutes, she gently interrupted. Jenna, I hear you, and I want to support you, but I also need to be honest. I feel like we've been having the same conversation for months, and I don't think I'm helping. Have you thought about talking to a therapist? There was a silence. Maya's heart raced. She felt sure Jenna would be hurt. But then Jenna said, You're right. I know I keep saying the same things. I guess I've been avoiding actually dealing with it. It wasn't a perfect conversation. Jenna was a little defensive, but she also heard Maya, and more importantly, Maya had spoken her truth. She had stopped over-functioning, and while it felt uncomfortable, it also felt like relief. With David, her co-worker, Maya tried something different. The next time he stopped by her desk to talk, she listened for a few minutes. Then she said, I'd love to hear more, but I actually need to focus right now. Can we catch up later? David seemed surprised, but he said sure and walked away. And Maya realized something. He wasn't offended. He just moved on. And she'd been giving him her attention all this time, not because he needed it, but because she didn't know how to say no. With her mother, the shift was slower. Maya couldn't change her mother's communication style, but she could change how she responded. She started limiting the length of their calls. She stopped trying to manage her mother's anxiety. When her mother hinted at something, instead of trying to guess what she meant, Maya started asking directly, What are you asking for? At first, her mother resisted. She didn't like being asked to be direct. But over time, something shifted. The dynamic became clearer. And while it wasn't perfect, it felt less exhausting. Maya also started spending more time with people who energized her. Her friend Lisa, who always asked about her life. Her co-worker Sam, who had a way of making even stressful days feel lighter. She noticed how different she felt after being with them. Not drained, not diminished, just herself. And she realized that this was what healthy connection felt like. It wasn't that Lisa and Sam never had problems or never needed support. They did. But the exchange was balanced. There was reciprocity. There was space for Maya to be a person, not just a listener. Maya also started checking in with herself during interactions. She'd pause internally and ask, "How am I feeling?" And if the answer was tired or resentful or invisible, she'd adjust. She'd redirect the conversation. She'd set a boundary. She'd leave. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she felt guilty. Moments when she worried she was being selfish. But she kept reminding herself of something she'd read. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It's necessary. And over time, something remarkable happened. Maya stopped feeling so exhausted. She stopped dreading certain interactions. She started to feel more like herself. Not because the people around her had changed, but because she had. She had learned to recognize the patterns that drained her. She had learned to set boundaries. She had learned to stop over-giving. And she had learned that she could care about people without losing herself in the process. Maya's relationships didn't all survive the shift. Some people didn't like the new boundaries. Some people pulled away when she stopped over-functioning, and that was painful. But it was also clarifying, because the relationships that remained, the ones that adjusted, the ones that made space for her needs, those were the ones worth keeping. And the ones that ended were the ones that had only ever worked because she was willing to disappear. As we come to the close of this audiobook, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. Feeling drained after certain interactions is not a sign of weakness. It's not a flaw in your character. It's not evidence that you're not strong enough or not kind enough. It's information. It's feedback about the nature of the interaction, about what's being asked of you, about whether the exchange is balanced. And when you learn to pay attention to that feedback, when you learn to trust it, you stop blaming yourself for feeling exhausted. You start to see the patterns, the dynamics, the roles you've been playing, and you begin to choose differently. You begin to see that not every interaction deserves your full energy, that not every relationship is meant to be equally deep, that you are allowed to have limits, that you are allowed to protect yourself, that you are allowed to say no. You begin to understand that boundaries are not walls. They're bridges. Bridges that allow you to stay connected without losing yourself. You begin to recognize that over-giving doesn't create closeness. It creates resentment. And that the most sustainable relationships are the ones where both people show up as whole, boundaried individuals. You begin to notice the difference between supporting someone and carrying them, between being present and being consumed, between caring and taking on responsibility for someone else's emotional life. And you begin to trust that caring for yourself is not selfish. It's foundational, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot show up for others if you're running on fumes. You cannot be present if you've given everything away. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop being there for people. It means you stop sacrificing yourself in the process. It means you learn to give from a place of abundance rather than depletion. It means you learn to receive as much as you give. And in that balance, you find something you may have lost along the way. Yourself, your clarity, your peace, your energy. This is not a journey that happens overnight. It's a practice, a daily choice to notice, to honor your limits, to speak your truth, to choose where you invest your time and attention. Some days you'll do it well. Some days you'll slip back into old patterns, And that's okay, because awareness is not about perfection. It's about direction. It's about moving slowly and steadily toward a way of being that feels more aligned, more sustainable, more true. And as you do, you'll find that the exhaustion you once thought was inevitable starts to lift. Not because people have changed, but because you have. You've learned to protect what matters. You've learned that your energy is valuable. You've learned that you are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to choose relationships that honor you. And in those choices, you reclaim something powerful: your presence, your peace, your life. Not every interaction will energize you. That's not the goal. But every interaction can be navigated with awareness, with intention, with boundaries that protect you without shutting others out. And that awareness, that intention, that protection, is what allows you to move through the world without losing yourself in it. So as you step back into your life, into your relationships, into the endless stream of interactions that make up your days, I invite you to remember this. You are not required to give endlessly. You are not required to absorb everyone's emotions. You are not required to disappear in order to be loved. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to be heard. You are allowed to protect your energy. And when you do, when you choose yourself without guilt, without apology, you don't lose connection. You find it. Real connection, the kind that doesn't drain you, the kind that doesn't require you to perform or shrink or give until there's nothing left, the kind that allows you to be whole. And that wholeness, that groundedness, that quiet strength is not selfish. It's sacred, because it's the foundation of everything else. Your peace, your presence, your ability to care without breaking. So protect it, honor it, trust it, and know that in doing so, you're not closing yourself off from the world. You're opening yourself to a life where you can finally breathe.